Good morning. Welcome to Weathersfield Proctor Library. I'm Glenna Coleman, Youth Services Librarian, and here's our library bear. We are here to read to you this morning. This book is called The Acrobat and the Angel. It is written by Mark Shannon and illustrated by David Shannon. And this is a retelling of a French folktale from the 12th or 13th century called The Acrobat of God or of Our Lady. So let's get started and see what The Acrobat and the Angel could possibly be all about. I think you'll find the illustrations quite wonderful as well. Once there was a poor lad named Pécole. When Pécole was still just a baby, the plague had struck his village, and both his parents fell desperately ill. They sent Pécole away with his grandmother to the other side of the mountains. That was the last Pécole saw of his mother or father. But into Pécole's blanket his mother had tucked an angel she had made of branches and dried flowers. From the time he could walk, Pécole showed a love for leaps and somersaults. By the time he was 7, he would get dressed every morning and then walk from his grandmother's stone cottage to the square in the village nearby. First, he would juggle with wooden balls. Then he would leap into the air like a fish and then tumble across the cobblestones, twisting his limbs into the craziest shapes. By the time he was 9, he could bound to the edge of the square's fountain and race around the rim on his hands. Pécole was an acrobat. His grandmother made him some special clothes, and day after day he put all the joy he had into his tricks. Little children especially loved Pécole. "Hooray for Pécole!" the crowds would say. A few coins would plunk into Pécole's hat. By nightfall, the money he'd gathered would buy just enough food for him and his grandmother. He does look very happy there, doesn't he? Every night, before dinner, Pécole and his grandmother would kneel down to pray before the angel Pécole's mother had left them. They would give thanks for each other and, as Pécole's grandmother would say, for the warmth and light inside us, which is all simple folks like ourselves can understand of God's mysterious ways. But one autumn morning, Pécole awoke to find his grandmother's body without life. Her soul had passed on without warning. Alone and with nothing to eat, Pécole left his home. He was too sad to perform his tricks. Instead, he wandered, begging scraps of food. As he went along, he heard that another outbreak of the plague had struck the villages on the other side of the mountains. Everyone said God was angry with all the sin in the world. People were more frightened than ever of misfortune. They wanted nothing to do with Pécole. He slept in stables with the horses, and then wandered on. Finally, one bitterly cold December evening, he collapsed on the steps of a roadside cross. As he lay silent and still, it began to snow. Late the next afternoon, Pécole slowly opened his eyes. A man was sitting next to him smiled through the steam of a bowl of broth he held. "Thank God we have not lost you. My name is Friar John," the man said. He told Pécole he had come across him on his way back from the village. "Now, let us get you something to eat," Friar John concluded, and he helped Pécole out of bed. Friar John took Pécole to a kitchen where the two of them sat in front of a roaring, crackling fire and talked while Friar John gave Pécole his fill of a bean and sausage stew. As Pécole revived, he told Friar John about his grandmother and his life as an acrobat, and about the prayers and the angel that always inspired him. "I am sure your grandmother and your parents are watching over you from heaven, Pécole," Friar John replied. "We have a statue of an angel in our cloister. Would you like to see it?" Pécole nodded. Friar John took Pécole to the back of the chapel. When Pécole saw the statue, his limbs started to tingle. Memories of home and of his mother's angel flooded his heart. He couldn't help but crouch and leap into the air, bursting into a series of handsprings and backflips around the chapel, his eyes shining. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded in the doorway. "John!" came a commanding voice. Pecole stopped. A man marched down the drafty length of the chapel, then whispered with Friar John. Finally, Friar John introduced Pecole to the abbot, the head of the monastery. "My poor son," began the abbot, "our chapel is a place of calm prayer and worship. It is no place for a circus. You may take shelter here only if you leave your carnival ways behind forever. Do I have your promise?" Pecole reached out and touched the robe of the angel. "I promise," he said. Pecole took a room next to Friar John's, and the man and the boy became like father and son. They ate their meals side by side, flanked by the other friars, at the monastery's long table. The friars enjoyed Pecole's sweet nature, but the abbot kept a stern eye on his behavior. Each day Pecole would do the different chores Friar John found for him, and every night he went to the angel and prayed, just as he always had. He missed his grandmother, but the angel's presence brought him comfort, and Pecole gave thanks for his new home. One spring afternoon, after Friar John had gone to pick up supplies in the village, Pecole was sweeping the monastery's front steps when he heard a child crying. Before long, a woman approached, cradling a small, wailing baby in her arms. "Oh, please, friar," she pleaded, "won't you bless my baby? I fear for his life." Pecole turned to look behind him to see who the woman was addressing, but no one else was there. When he looked again at the child, he saw the black splotches. The little boy had caught the plague. Pecole gasped, unsure what to do. "Please, friar, I have journeyed far to come here. I beg you," cried the woman. So Pecole put aside the broom. He made a butterfly with his hands. The child's wild blue eyes turned toward Pecole's graceful fingers, which began to fly and flit about the steps as though they had a mind of their own, with the rest of Pecole trying to keep up. The boy waved his small arms and his crying subsided. Pecole's butterfly flew closer. Suddenly the child burst into a wail again. His hot, pained breath struck Pecole's face. Pecole could not bear the child's suffering. He paused and glanced around quickly, remembering his promise to the abbot. Then Pecole sprang into his tricks. He gave the child all the joy he shared with the crowds in the square not long ago. He jumped onto his hands and walked on them like a funny creature up the steps. The child stopped crying. Then Pecole launched himself from the top step and turned 2 somersaults in the air. But just as the child's laughter rang out, the abbot's looming figure appeared in the doorway behind Pecole. His eyes were flashing with anger. "Pecole," the abbot shouted, "you have broken your promise." Then he looked at the woman and her child. "God forgive us, this child carries the plague. And now perhaps you have caught the disease as well," he said, pointing at Pecole. "You have betrayed us all before God. You must leave at once." With that, he went back into the monastery and slammed the heavy carved doors behind him. Pecole stood in shock. Just then, Friar John returned from his errands, hurrying beneath the light afternoon rain. He listened to Pecole recount what had happened. Friar John spoke urgently to the woman. "Don't go back to your village. Wait for us at the cross near the bottom of the hill. We will come for you soon." "Friar John, may I see the angel one last time?" Pecole's face was pale and his eyes were welling with tears. "Of course, Pecole," Friar John said. "Of course. But we must hurry." "Angel," Pecole said, "if I must leave you, I thank you with all that I have for all the warmth and light you have given me. Please bless the friars and the poor woman and her little boy." Then Pecole leaped into the air. Friar John had never seen such tricks performed with so much spirit, so much soul. It was like a beautiful, hypnotizing dance. Nevertheless, he began to move forward to stop Pecole. But at that very moment, the chapel began filling with light. As Friar John watched, with eyes wide in astonishment, the statue began to stir. The angel with lifted her wings and glided toward Pekale on a ray of gleaming white light. She took Pekale's hand, and the two of them began to float off the ground together, slowly rising until they became a single figure, which then vanished into the air. "Heaven be upon us," said a voice behind Friar John. "What have I done?" Friar John turned to see the abbot holding his cross over his heart. When Friar John turned around again, he saw white petals falling like snow from heaven. He remembered finding Pekale that cold December evening. As his memory drifted through all his days with Pekale, Friar John watched the petals turn into white butterflies, and then these too were gone. Friar John went again to the roadside cross, where he found the woman holding her child. The child's skin was bright and clear. Pekale had vanished, but so had all traces of the plague. In fact, the plague never came again to the villages around the monastery, and the next fall's harvest was bountiful. Friar John and the abbot knew they had witnessed a miracle that day. So, in the place where the angel's statue once stood, there now rests a statue of Pekale, the Acrobat of God. And if you were ever to visit the monastery, you might just see a friar or two out in the orchard, turning a somersault in the sweet spring air. Well, we hope you enjoyed the story The Acrobat and the Angel, written by Mark Shannon, and illustrated by David Shannon. Let me open this book cover up the entire way so you can see. We've got both the Acrobat and the Angel on the cover. Well, goodbye for now from Weathersfield Proctor Library Storytime. I'm Glenda Coleman, the Youth Services Librarian, and our library bear says we'll see you next time. Goodbye.